Dear students, let us start the discussion on today's newspaper, that is 24th October 2016. The first article is related to the urbanization in India. So recently in Ecuador, a conference was held. It is UN Conference on Housing and Sustainable Development, which is also famously called as UN Habitat 3. So, in this conference, the major issues which are being discussed are very much relevant to India and its urbanization. So, if you see situation of India now, the urbanization is happening on a faster pace, and it is expected that more than half of the population by 2040 live in urban areas in India. In this scenario, providing for civic communities in the urban areas is a daunting task before the government. The nature of urbanization is also very resource intensive in India. The urbanization is more happening towards the primate cities, that is, bigger cities, rather than to the middle sized towns. So, as the size of the city grows, provision of the urban amenities, the cost of provision is bound to multiply many a times. So, this is the challenge which the urban areas in India are facing. And obviously, along with that, governance challenge and growth of the slums, these are the things which we have to face. So, as of now, around 30% of the population and 26% of the total workforce it is living in the urban areas. And among the population living in urban areas, around 17% of the people, these are living in slums. So it means there is a rapid growth of the slum population in India where the civic communities are absent and there is growth of civic penalties. What do I mean by urban penalties or urban civic penalties mean? Now they are more exposed to crime, they are more exposed to inequalities, lack of basic amenities for living. So that's going to make a deplorable living for these people. So in this context, the UN Habitat 3, it has specifically spoken about the urban divides. What is meant by this? Now, urban areas, one side you can see the wealth, on the other side you can see the extreme poverty. So there is no an egalitarian approach in the urbanization or urban growth. And the second is the urban governance. So, in the era of climate change, so the urban disasters are also increasing. Now, if you take in India, the recent Hyderabad floods or else in Chennai, so all these things where the mismanagement of the governance is clearly visible. So most of the problems in India with regard to urban governance are closely linked with the higher levels of the governments in India. So in our local governments, we study about lack of the transfer of three F's over here. So, as the climate change is posing new challenges, the urban governance has to be geared up towards these new challenges. And the next is new modes of urban transport, urban mobility is required. So, remember the famous statement over here: a country has become rich if when every rich man is able to travel through an urban transport rather than every rich man travels through a car. So it means it is not about using the personal transport, it is about making everyone use the public transport that shows the changing pattern and attitude of the country. So, but in India, so the vehicular population to growth in roads are per user based density of the roads is very less in India. So, in this context, having a national urban transport policy is very critical. And the next is government of India is aimed to achieve the housing for all. So with regard to the housing for all, so it wanted to, uh, partnership with the private people and bring in prefabricated, renovate the existing slums. So Amrut and the Smart Cities mission are in a way towards this. So are they are really focused towards the slum development? Not exactly. And their public private partnership approach is also filled with many problems and dilemmas. Especially if you take the smart cities mission, the major criticism about that is it is going to create the islands of development rather than providing for strengthening of the urban governance and equitable development of all the areas and provision of the basic amenities and infrastructure in the urban areas. So these are the problems which India has to hold or India has to solve. Now, coming to the kingdom of bonds, it is related to the Saudi Arabia. And the Saudi Arabia's fiscal deficit is highest now. It is around 16% of the GDP. So in this context, the Saudi Arabia's major reasons for this economic fallout are its involvement in wars in Syria and Yemen, and the second thing, fall in oil prices, and failure to reduce the expenditure. So these are the major reasons. So here they want to renovate on the economy or change their economy for the better. So their economy is majorly dependent on only one product commodity, that is oil. So the second best export of the Saudi Arabia is the dates. So, as the unique commodity dependent economy, it needs to diversify its economy into multiple exports. So, recently it has started taking up various infrastructure, defense, and military industrial complex development, etc., to diversify itself. But, however, the Saudi's policy is pump at will policy. So, it was guided by the shale producers in the United States of America. So, especially maximum production of the oil and oversupply of the oil, it has led to the fall in prices. Now, in this context, a barrel of oil has come down to less than $30. So, it has hurt the Saudi Arabia the worst compared to its rivals. So, finally, at the OPEC conference, Saudi Arabia is going to change its stand. Rather than pump at will, it's going to reduce its production to maintain the higher oil prices. So, in this context, the regional competition and availability of the oil also has increased because of the removal of the sanctions against Iran. And the second problem is the Saudi Arabia, most of the population is dependent on immigrant workers, and changing the work pattern or changing the employment pattern where native Saudis will be brought into the jobs is very difficult. So in this context, the Saudi Arabian government has issued the bonds worth of $17 billion, and there was a huge demand for these bonds. The reason being the low interest rates that are existing in the developed countries as of now. And in this month, the oil prices appeared to be stable at $50 per barrel, and they are seeing an upward trend as the supply has been cut down in the short span of time. So, and for these circumstances, there is a better demand for the Saudi bonds. And then coming to the city of dreams, Mumbai, and recent Fadnavis government's action with regard to the MNS dictum on Edile Mushkil movie. Now understand what is the role of the government in a democracy. First, it shall ensure rule of law and protect the rights of the citizens. And the second thing is, so the government is the only any element in the state. Our government is only element that is allowed to use force legitimately. So this force, it can use it to maintain the order in the society. So when the law and order is disturbed, and when certain elements are creating disturbance to it, it can legitimately use the force to control these elements. So as of now, if you see the rule of law situation, the government of India did not ban any of the Pakistani artists, or it did not, impose any visa restrictions on them. So on the context, how certain fringe elements, certain peripheral political parties can give the dictums to the government. So to what extent government is supposed to respond to them? So the government shall show its presence and its strength and its ability to solve the issues. If the government appears to be bent down, this sets a precedence where everyone starts demanding and takes the government for granted. It creates a situation of lawlessness and anarchy. So in this context, in any country, the government shall use its authority for a good purpose, use its authority to control these fringe elements which are the reasons for the lawlessness, and in the with the objective of achieving the protection of the human rights. That's where the Fadnavis government appeared to be failed. Now coming to India and the terrorism. Now let us see certain questions over here. India, is it pre-focused on terrorism? What made India to gain the respect in the world communities from the Nehruvian era? And the single narrative of terrorism, does it exist in the world now? So let us see these three things. Now, historically, India has enjoyed the respect of the world countries because it was stood for the common good. So now, as India is trying to project its self interest as a common good, either the UN reforms, entry into NSG, or fight against terrorism, then obviously the countries are becoming very conscious to support the Indian moves. And when India has opposed CTBT, non-proliferation, nuclear non-proliferation treaty, there is a huge support for India because India was able to take the moral high ground on these issues. Now, from Rajiv Gandhi era, we are asking for comprehensive convention on international terrorism CCIT, but there is no much movement forward because there is no common definition for terrorism. And terrorist to a nation is a freedom fighter to the other man. So, how to define the terrorist is a major question before the United Nations. Even United Nations says that it condemns the all forms of the terrorism. But what are these all forms and what is the definition of the terrorism? It is not yet clear. So now, India, by focusing on terrorism as one single agenda at all multilateral forums, it is creating a binary. It is creating a litmus test for its friends that either you can be a friend of India or else enemy of India. If you want to be a friend of India, you shall accept its narrative on cross-border terrorism. So where Pakistan shall be declared as a terror state, or Pakistan shall be taken as an exporter of the terrorism. So to an extent it may be true, but however, we cannot force the other countries to come to this conclusion. And India, more and more it raises the cross-border terrorism. It also has a negative externality such as internationalization of the Kashmir issue. So which is not in support of the India's position on the Kashmir. Previously, Pakistan was criticized for this. Wherever the Pakistan goes, in whatever the forum, its only stand or its only talk is on Kashmir. Thus, similarly, India is now projecting itself as only a country which is concerned about the terrorism. So India has to broad base its policies and it has to widen its diplomatic outreach and it has to bring itself back to the global commons and interests of the global community and shall be a torch bearer for the developing and underdeveloped nations. So these are the articles for today in this. Now coming to justice delivery. Again, how the investors get attracted. So, what is the primary importance in governance for the investors? Now, anywhere, if you see India US bilateral investment treaty or state investor disputes, the major complaint of the investors against India is there is no policy predictability, that is one thing, and judicial delays. So, in the investor and state disputes and in bilateral investment treaty with the United States of America, so what they ask for is, so let us give a chance to get arbitration from outside rather than going through the Herculean task of Indian courts. So the justice or delay in the justice delivery is cited as a major reason for troubles of the investors. So in this context, a predictable policy and a rule of law situation is very critical for the business to flourish. So the investments gets into India when the use of doing business is eased. And one of the important factor in ease of doing business is maintenance of the rule of law and effective justice delivery. In this context, India is also establishing the commercial courts, which is a step forward. And then INS Virat is decommissioned. It is the world's oldest aircraft carrier and it's got decommissioned in Kochi. Now, coming to the business page. So, with regard to the regional party airports, so there is an UDAN scheme. Under the UDAN scheme, the airlines connecting the regional airports, they will get the subsidy from the government. So, in this case, the SpiceJet chief, Mr. Ajay Singh, he has discussed or he has demanded for greater subsidy for the airlines that connect between the regional airports and regional airports to the major city hub. So in this scenario, the government has agreed that there will be 10% of greater subsidy for airlines connecting the two regional cities. And there will be a greater or else there will be a subsidy for use in the airport facilities. And more and more, uh, an airlines is filling its seats more than 90%, then it will be declared that the route has become viable and the subsidy will come down. But this provision is being removed now. And coming to air traffic control towers, to build a ATC it costs around 300 crore rupees. The government, instead of building the ATCs in every airport, it wants to remotely manage the regional airports from a distant localities, that is through, from Hyderabad to manage the cities such as Rajahmundry, etc. That's what is being planned for. Now, female literacy. Now, understand, in India, the school dropout rate is the major problem, and the quality of learning is the major problem. So, in India, the literacy rate and school attendance, or else, what I can say is, the enrollment rate, though, is increasing, the quality of learning outcomes is still very poor. So, in this case, if you take the UNESCO report, it clearly states that India has to improve its learning standards. So, in the first 5 years of time, India has to focus only on the mental maturity or development of the child. Up to fifth class, there shall not be any pressure on the child to learn, then only the learning outcomes will improve. It has taken the example of the Thailand to explain the India situation, where the Thailand, though enrollment ratio is less than India, the learning outcomes are much high compared to India. So, in this scenario, so the recent report which was given by an New York based organization, that is International Commission on Financing Global Education Opportunity, or it is simply called as Education Commission, it exposes the poor learning outcomes in India. A girl child who has studied up to fifth class and her literacy is compared, it is just 48% in India, which is less than Pakistan and Bangladesh. So it is the observations of the Education Commission are in correlation with the UNESCO's Global Education Report. Now, IPS and IAS, they demand for parity with each other. So the Seventh Pay Commission has recommended for parity between all India services and central services. So what are the reasons for the same? One thing is the specialization of the service is increasing. Every service has its own challenges. So the generalist approach is giving away for the specialist approach. So in this context, the specialized services, they also need to be given a greater parity for the better motivation and to provide them with better working environment. But however, the IAS says that the higher positions in the government, these are mostly occupied by the civils or else IAS officers. So in this scenario, to maintain that authority and command, so to maintain that hierarchical discipline, so the 2 years of automatic service which was given to the IAS, it has to be maintained. So it automatically provides a 2 year seniority, and because of this higher seniority, they will enjoy the authority over the IPS and the other central services. Now, other services argue that the IAS has a closeness to the minister. Being it close to the minister, it was able to maintain or it's a self-interest, or it's able to maintain a strong lobby to protect its self-interest. So that's why if any reforms are implemented, the IAS lobby is the major blockade. So beyond this IAS lobby, the government has to think and has to implement the Seventh Pay Commission recommendations. Now, United States is going tough against the Pakistan because it has clearly said that ISI is promoting certain terror groups, especially the Haqqani network, which is responsible for violence in Afghanistan. So it said if Pakistan do not act on the terror groups, it will take the actions on by itself. So these are the articles for today. So today I tried to type something and manage the things. So with regard to the notes, I'm trying to manage my time where I'll be able to provide you the notes by evening. So let us try to improve the situation. And thank you very much. All the best.